Okay. Exploring Regency-Era fashions for women and men by a prejudiced and amateur seamstress. I have titled my talk in the similar vein of the title of Jane Austen's juvenilia work, A History of England by a partial, prejudiced, and ignorant historian. I'm a prejudiced seamstress since I only want to create Regency clothing that I think will flatter me, or that I think will make me look more like Mary Crawford than Fanny Price. Also, I like to insert humorous or unexpected elements into my outfits. And I like to poke fun at the idea of a middle-aged woman who enjoys Regency cosplay. I call myself an amateur seamstress because although I have created several Regency outfits in women's and menswear, I am no expert in dressmaking. Indeed, my sole knowledge of sewing consists of one semester of sewing as part of 7th grade home economics over 50 years ago. I have made all my outfits on 2 very basic sewing machines that I purchased for my daughters when I had them take summer sewing lessons when they were in elementary school. So no fancy computerized sewing machines. What I want to impart to you is that if I can do this, you can too, especially now that everything is demonstrated on YouTube. I certainly don't profess myself to be an authority on Regency-era fashion. My knowledge of it only comes from my being fascinated by it and reading as much as I can about it. Indeed, I think I may boast myself to be, with all possible vanity, the most unlearned and uninformed female who ever dared to be a seamstress. I've been a member of JASNA, Jane Austen Society, for 12 years. I attended my first AGM, annual general meeting, in 2009 in Philadelphia, thanks to my friend, Judy Debke, who encouraged me to attend. I decided to wear Regency dress at it since I had earlier attended Jane Austen Festival in Bath. The great thing about JASNA is that I've learned so much from presentations by JASNA members Lisa Brown, Kristen Miller-Zone, and at workshops and regional meetings. I've been inspired by fellow enthusiasts, Baronda Bradley, Kimberly Millam, Siri James, Kathleen Dixon, my sister-in-law Francie Willis, among many others. In this presentation, I will show you several of the outfits I've made over the years, including hats and reticules, and talk about the materials and their inspirations, such as whether they were copied from a fashion plate, or a costume exhibit, or a painting, or an image, or inspired by a movie adaptation, or television series, or by the particular theme or location of that year's AGM. I'll talk in very general terms about the changes in styles of clothing during the period 1790 through 1820, as well as the influences on Regency-era fashion of neoclassical styles, military uniforms, Orientalism, how the English exoticized and appropriated elements from the East, and the revival of Renaissance and Elizabethan era styles. These are engraved plates from monthly fashion periodicals, and this is where the term fashion plate comes from. Fashion plates marketed visual representations of idealized styles to a newly consuming public. Some of the periodicals were Ackerman's Repository of the Arts, La Belle Assemblée, Ladies' Monthly Magazine, Le Bon Monde. I will be illustrating fashion elements with these plates. Along the way, I will show you the patterns I've used and practical tips and hacks that might help you in creating your own Regency fashion. A complete list of patterns, fabric sources, and indispensable sewing tools will be made available on the JASNA Southwest website afterwards. Jane Austen may have depicted dress as the concern of the immature Catherine Morland or the vulgar Mrs. Elton, but from her personal letters, we see that Austen closely followed fashion. Her letters are full of details of current fashion, dressmaking, alterations, and purchases to keep up with the changing styles. Jane Austen's meager budget for 1807 shows that of her approximately £50 yearly amount, her principal expense was £13 for, quote, clothes and pocket, or almost 30% of her annual income. This presentation will be in 3 parts. Volume the first, Regency-Era women's fashion. Clothing changed dramatically over Jane Austen's lifetime in both styles and fabric. When Jane Austen was born in 1775, Georgian clothing was stiff and formal. When she was a girl, ladies went to parties in heavy silk dresses over hoop petticoats, tightly corseted, with a towering hairdo, which was powdered, greased, and fashioned over a cushion. But by 1800, just 25 years later, fashion had transformed completely to slim, plain, and proportioned to the body. The French Revolution had overturned fashion as well as society. Rejection of the old order was reflected by adopting neoclassical styles based on the Greek and Roman styles with bare arms and column-like gowns. Textiles became lighter and thinner. Muslin was a delicately woven cotton fabric imported from India, so transparent that it had to be worn in multiple layers, or not. When we talk about fashion and clothing, we should recognize how the fabric itself was produced and where it came from. In the 1780s and 1790s, transparent cotton muslin became the favored material for women's gowns. The finest muslins were imported exclusively from India by the East India Company, until England killed the Bengali textile industry to support cheap machine-made muslin produced in English factories. Raw cotton imports to Britain boomed during the period 1780 through 1815. This cotton first came from slave plantations in the West Indies, but when they could not keep up with England's demand, America became the biggest supplier of cotton to British mills in northern England. So, British clothing in the early 19th century was the product of British colonial power. Many people became wealthy from the cotton textile industry and were among the first to attain social mobility. Charles Bingley's wealth is new money. He is from the north of England, known for its many industrialized mills in the booming textile business. The low production costs of cotton came at a high human price, as the new factory system exploited a cheap English labor force of women and children from local workhouses. During Austen's lifetime, the cotton trade and textile business were identified with getting rich quickly. In the Regency era, hairstyles had also transformed to a natural look, evoking the Grecian style with tight, unpowdered curls. Jane Austen luckily possessed naturally curly hair to create the desired ringlets without the need of papers. In addition to classicism, other historical influences were reflected in Regency-era fashion. Elizabethan ruff collars and slashed sleeves evoked Renaissance fashions. Banded sleeves evoked 17th century fashions. Interest in the past also included romanticizing Scottish heritage by the wearing of tartans and berets. I made my beret from this pattern called La Mode Bagatelle, Regency wardrobe, which I downsized. Another major aesthetic influence on Regency-era dress was Orientalism, a way of exoticizing and imagining Asian, African, and Middle Eastern cultures. Turbans came into style as a form of Orientalism after Admiral Nelson's victory in Egypt at the Battle of the Nile in 1798. Mameluke caps were also adopted after the Battle of the Nile. Jane Austen wrote Cassandra in 1799. I am to wear a Mameluke cap instead. It is all the fashion now. This is a dress I made from silk sari material that I purchased in a shop where Indian brides obtained their wedding saris. In keeping with the Regency-era's Orientalist style, I appropriated a version of a groom's hat that I have seen at Hindu weddings. Military uniforms had the strongest influence on civilian style. The presence of militia in local towns such as Meryton made Regency women such as Lydia and Kitty very aware of military style. Here I used cords, tassels, and feathers on the spencer and hat to mimic military uniform decorations. The spencer and hat are made of cotton velveteen. This hat was inspired by the shako hat worn by the character of Richard Sharp in the television series starring Sean Bean called Sharp's Rifles, set during the Napoleonic Wars and based upon Bernard Cornwell's novels. During the Regency era, Britain was at war with France for over 20 years. Military styles were reflected in women's fashions from the 1790s as upper-class women supported their husbands and relatives by wearing a feminized version of their uniforms. Here I copied a spencer and hat from a fashion plate from 1798 from Ladies Monthly magazine. The image was a very small one that I saw in the magazine Jane Austen's Regency World, and I wasn't able to locate a larger image, so I had to imagine the spencer and the hat. The spencer is made of wool. I wore this at the 2019 AGM in Williamsburg, Virginia, since Williamsburg was the capital of the colony of Virginia until 1780. The spencer simulates the British redcoat. Here's a close-up of the top of the hat. The hat I purchased at Michael's craft store during the Halloween season. I simply covered it with fabric and netting and trimmed it with feathers. Here is the only full-face portrait of Jane Austen, made in 1810 by her sister Cassandra, when Austen was 35, which is in the National Portrait Gallery in London. Over 50 years after her death, an engraving was made in 1873 based on that portrait. This is the image we most often see, which I copied when I made my Jane Austen outfit. Older and married women generally wore caps all day at home. As a matter of convenience, Austen wore one from the age of 23. This is an example of undress. Undress for women meant simpler gowns worn at home in the morning, before the afternoon and before one was formally dressed. They were looser, more comfortable gowns made of warmer, more practical materials for sitting, writing letters, sewing, reading, or receiving visitors. This mode was also called morning dress, home dress. Undress had longer sleeves and higher necklines than dress for later in the day. Among the gentry, white was the most popular color for morning undress, a step up from the common print gown, which I am wearing. By the way, this fabric I obtained from reproductionfabrics.com, which sells cotton printed in reproductions of various eras. A neckline could be filled in with a Shimmerset. A Shimmerset gives the impression of an elaborate undergarment, but it is sleeveless and is tied around the upper body with a drawstring. Undersleeves were removable and were often worn with short sleeve dresses. Both could give variety to a limited wardrobe. Here are patterns for a Shimmerset and undersleeves from Sense and Sensibility and La Mode Bagatelle. Cassandra's portrait of Jane Austen shows her in a cotton morning dress or undress. The bodice is fastened at the center back instead of the front, a feature which began about 1804. A dress made in this construction was called a frock. Most of the gowns I've made, which I'll be showing you, are based on these Sense and Sensibility patterns or a variation of them. They date from the mid-1790s to the early 1800s. Jane Austen wrote to Cassandra in 1798, "I cannot determine what to do about my new gown. I wish such things were to be bought ready-made." Close quote. Most women had their clothes, such as gowns and jackets, made by professional dressmakers or mantua makers. When women talked of buying a new gown, that meant buying a length of cloth for their dressmaker to make into a gown. If you wanted to pay morning visits, shop, or walk, you would put on an outer garment such as a pelisse or a spencer. A pelisse was like a coat worn outdoors in heavier fabrics and indoors and in summer in lighter fabrics, such as Jane Austen's silk pelisse. From it, we can tell she was 5'7" and a size 2. And here is a pelisse and spencer pattern from Laughing Moon for the period 1810 to 1825. One could also don a spencer. The short fitted jacket came into fashion in the late 1790s to wear as outerwear over the new style of dresses. It was cut to the bust line and tailored on identical lines to the dress. Spencers were usually made of strong, contrasting colors, accenting lighter colored dresses. However, in putting a red spencer over a blue dress, I chose to echo the colors of the Union Jack. And in putting a light blue spencer over a gold dress, I chose UCLA colors. The spencer jacket was adapted from the menswear of the 1790s. Supposedly, the second Earl Spencer invented the style when he ripped off the tails of his riding coat after they became torn while riding or became singed in the fire. However, another origin story is that his younger brother betted some friends that, quote, he could sport a fashion the most useless and ridiculous that could be conceived, and that it should be universally adopted. Spencers might be made of silk, wool, or cotton, plain or patterned. They could be lightweight and worn with shawls. Hats and reticules were color coordinated with them. Spencers remained in style until the 1820s, when waistlines began to fall. I made my spencers out of silk, cotton velveteen, and cotton from this pattern called La Mode Bagatelle. By the 1790s, cashmere shawls from India were being adopted as part of Regency dress. The unstructured shape evoked the classical style of the long palla that Roman women draped around their head and shoulders. To go out, one would wear a bonnet or a cap. Straw hats were popular for mourning or informal wear. Women would trim and retrim their bonnets to keep up with the latest styles. Jane Austen wrote to Cassandra in 1798, I shall begin my operations on my hat, on which you know my principal hopes of happiness depend. Hats for afternoon or promenade were made of fabric, of satin, velvet, or muslin, and trimmed with ribbons and lace. I made this bonnet from a pattern from Timely Tresses for the period 1800 to 1810. Here are patterns for other hats from the Regency-Era from Timely Tresses. This is a helpful book on hat construction. From the Neck Up, an illustrated guide to hat making by Denise Dreher. The Ridicule, or drawstring purse, appeared in the late 1790s as women's full skirts changed to slim garments. Prior to the change in clothing style, women carried their personal belongings in pockets tied around their waist and accessed through slits in the side seams of full skirts. Last month at the virtual AGM, we learned from Candace Hearn of JASNA, Minnesota, that Jane Austen would have called this a ridicule, since the term reticule was not in use until 1830. The concept of women carrying their personal belongings in their hand instead of hidden away in pockets was considered ridiculous, slightly vulgar, and also condemned for being masculine, since this is what men did. Here are my examples of a reticule, also called an indispensable. Mine are made of silk, cotton velveteen, and upholstery fabric. I color coordinated them with the spencer and hat. Women often made their own reticules and trimmed them with embroidery or beading. Candace Hearn of JASNA, Minnesota, showed us what a Regency woman carried in her reticule, illustrating from her personal collection. It included a calendar called a pocketbook, a miniature almanac, perfume, a cosmetic case, a coin purse, knitted, netted, or beaded, a fan, and a vinaigrette. However, my reticule contains rather different things in 2020. I expanded this reticule pattern by ostentation to a larger size to fit all the necessaries one would require at an AGM. Gloves are essential as part of a respectable person's wardrobe for weather protection and style. Short gloves for daytime and long gloves above the elbows in the evening. Here is a hat I made that was inspired by the location of the AGM one year. In 2012, the AGM was held in New York, so I made this Statue of Liberty hat and wore it at the banquet and ball. In 2019, JASNA celebrated its 40th anniversary. In commemoration of that milestone, I made a sash out of all the AGM tote bags I had collected and wore it like a homecoming queen at the AGM in Williamsburg, Virginia. So, in planning my outfit for the Saturday night banquet and ball, I have sometimes incorporated the location or theme of the AGM and poked fun at the cosplay aspect of it all. Lord Byron, the Romantic poet, was a contemporary of Jane Austen. This portrait shows Lord Byron in 1813 at the age of 25. Byron was quite vain. He had many portraits made of himself, but he preferred this one above all others. I was inspired to copy the outfit in this painting, which is the most famous and enduring image of the poet. Byron visited Albania in 1809 as part of his grand tour and loved the traditional Albanian costume, which he sent back to England. The bottom of the skirt is not shown in the Phillips painting. However, in other images of Lord Byron, he is portrayed wearing a fustanella, a white kilt, which both Greece and Albania claim as a national costume. So I decided to make this kilt as part of the costume. Lord Byron died in Greece in 1824, where he had gone to join the Greeks in fighting against Ottoman rule. Here, Byron is standing next to a Pageant of the Masters live actor recreating a classical Greek statue. This fashion plate from 1810 is called Promenade or Opera Dress from Ackerman's Repository. By 1810, the waistline has started to drop slightly from under the bust. Also, less revealing styles began to prevail with longer sleeves and higher necklines. Necklines were commonly filled in with chemisets or with a collar or ruffles around the neck. I copied both the dress and hat from this fashion plate and made them out of silk. I thought the style actually looked quite modern. I only copy fashion plates that I think I can accomplish successfully, but also that I wouldn't feel too silly being seen in. And when I saw this fashion plate, I could see myself wearing that style. There was no image of the back of this dress, so I just made it up based on what it looked like in the front. By the way, this dress as a promenade dress would be considered half dress or afternoon dress. I made the hat out of a bendable craft material that I don't even know the name of, which I purchased at Joann's fabric store. I covered it in silk and trimmed it with feathers and lace. This is a fashion plate from 1817 from La Belle Assemblée called a walking dress. As a walking dress, it would be considered half dress or afternoon dress and was distinguished by better fabrics, darker colors, and extra embellishments. Hilary Davidson notes in her book, Dress in the Age of Jane Austen, that surviving garments indicate that plates represented in this periodical, La Belle Assemblée, are considered aspirational fashion rather than accurate representations of Regency style. Nevertheless, I copied the dress and hat of this imaginative fashion plate and made it out of silk. By 1817, skirts are increasingly triangular and the waistline continues to drop for day wear. There is a marked increase in the use of notions such as buttons, cording, and tassels to trim gowns. Hem decorations are also becoming popular. I created the belt out of a drapery tie and used tassels, all upholstery notions purchased from Joann's. The fashion plate depicts a pelisse or redingote, which was a long fitted coat worn over a dress. But I created it as a single dress to simplify it and create less layers of clothing. By 1815, fashion had shifted away from neoclassicism to romanticism. Skirts grew wider and dresses were heavily trimmed with ruffles, bows, lace, and embroidery. Silks, velvets, and wool were back in fashion. Bonnets and hats became large and whimsical. The age of simplicity and neoclassicism had ended. I wore this dress at the 2012 AGM in Brooklyn, where the incomparable Dr. Cornel West was the plenary speaker on Emma. These fashion plates are examples of full dress or evening dress, which was most formal wear for balls, Almack's Club, and most fancy parties. In the evening, short sleeves would be worn and neck and shoulders were uncovered. Long white gloves were worn. Full dress gowns could be very low cut. The hair would generally be uncovered and dressed with combs, ornament jewelry, or flowers. These silk dresses are my interpretations of full dress. For appropriate evening wear, white was associated with youth, but older women also wore white at the height of its popularity. Deep colors would have been worn only by married women. Silks, whether white or colored, were always considered dressier than the finest muslin. With the ban on French silks during the Napoleonic Wars and patriotic pride for English muslin, the popularity of silk had waned. However, silk, which was smuggled, was still used in evening full dress. Before we leave women's dress, we must talk about their undergarments. Women wore a shift or a chemise next to the skin. Stays were worn over the shift as bust support. The style of stays and corsets changed over the course of the Regency-Era. In 1813, Jane Austen wrote to Cassandra, "I learnt to my high amusement that the stays now are not meant to force the bosom up at all. That was a very unbecoming, unnatural fashion." Last month at the virtual AGM, we learned from Mackenzie Schatz and Kristen Miller-Zone that stays and corsets were necessary not only to achieve the fashionable Regency silhouette, but also to achieve correct posture, which reflected good moral character. The wearing of stays was equated with respectability, and the removal of them meant dishonor. I myself don't wear stays, I just wear a push-up bra. However, stays or a corset will provide the uplift required for the correct silhouette for the Regency-Era gown with its high empire waistline. And it should be worn before measurements and fittings are made for a gown. Sense and Sensibility Regency Underthings pattern is for short stays and a chemise. For more full-figured women, however, a corset instead of short stays is recommended. Mantua Maker has such a pattern, number 1810-3. A petticoat was worn over the stays and functioned as a slip to keep the skirt from clinging to one's legs. They could be worn for warmth or as a finer quality underskirt meant to be seen. When Caroline Bingley says of Elizabeth, "I hope you saw her petticoat 6 inches deep in mud and the gown which had been let down to hide it not doing its office," it meant that Elizabeth would have pinned up her gown to walk the 3 miles to Netherfield, but when she let down her gown, it did not cover up her muddy petticoat. Women did not wear underpants. Drawers for females existed by 1806, but any bifurcated garment was considered masculine and thus risque. Women who wore drawers were seen as vulgar, since prior to the Regency, the only women who wore them were prostitutes. It was not common for adult women to wear drawers until after 1820. So yes, Jane Austen went commando. Volume the second, Regency-Era men's fashion. From the late 1790s, powdered hair and wigs disappeared. The new hairstyle was a cropped, curled, and artfully disheveled look modeled after antique sculpture. In the 1780s, fancy gentlemen wore embroidered velvets and silks, lace ruffles, diamond buckles, silk stockings. And just as women's fashions had transformed dramatically, men's fashions changed to emulate the lean look of a Grecian statue. Beau Brummel was the most influential figure of early 19th century men's clothing. He introduced the elegant, restrained look of the riding dress style, with a perfectly tailored dark coat, a clean linen shirt with a white neckcloth, and a plain waistcoat. Brummel created the ensemble that became the basis of the male wardrobe for the next 100 years. To be truly elegant, one should not be noticed. In the early 1800s, men's equestrian dress became popular for men's daytime dress or informal undress. The riding style meant that by 1806, all men looked as if they had just come in from riding. Riding clothes traditionally worn on country estates became normal city style. Boots rather than shoes, split coattails designed for riding, chamois leather breeches, and waistcoats made of lighter fabrics. In 1796, Jane Austen wrote Cassandra, "We are very busy making Edward's shirts, and I am proud to say that I am the neatest worker of the party." Female family members sewed shirts for their male relatives, as Jane Austen, her sister, and mother did. Austen was known for being especially skilled in needlework. Here is a portion of a cutting diagram for a man's shirt, which, as you can see, is just a series of squares and rectangles. In 1800, Austen wrote Cassandra that she is to send their brother Charles, who is at port, shirts by the half dozen as they are finished. Making shirts 6 or a dozen at a time was economically efficient, since linen was sold in 26-yard pieces, which allowed shirts to be made in bulk. Since laundry was such a labor-intensive process that took 3 to 4 days, laundry was usually done only once a month or once a quarter. So shirts were supplied by the dozens. One would send their laundry to a washerwoman who would list each item on a washing bill, like the ones Catherine Morland mistakes for a Gothic manuscript in the cabinet at Northanger Abbey. Shirts were made of linen until the 1820s, when they were made of cotton. The pattern I used is called Cannock's Corner for the period 1790 through 1830. A man's shirt would have reached mid-thigh, and before drawers were in use, the shirt tails would have been tucked between the legs. A man's shirt was considered underwear, and thus private and intimate and possibly vulgar. So this scene of Elizabeth encountering Darcy at Pemberley in just his shirt would have been quite scandalous and very embarrassing. Brummell's requirement of a meticulously arranged cravat made them the rage among upper-class gentlemen. He was the first to be credited with starching his neckcloths. Brummell also introduced cleanliness as a key component of his aesthetic. No perfumes, but very fine linen, plenty of it, and country washing. Here is a pattern for making a triangular cravat and instructions on how to fold it. Make it out of very lightweight cotton. This pattern and folding and tying instructions will be made available on the JASNA Southwest website. This triangular cravat pattern is tied as a mathematical cravat. After you fold the cravat, find the midpoint and place it at the front of your neck, draping the ends behind your neck. Cross the ends behind your neck, pulling tightly. Bring the ends forward and tie it into a square knot at the front of your neck. The cravat is wrapped around a tall collar. Collar points were called ears. They were square and fashionably covered the jawbone. Breeches, spelled like breeches, were made out of buckskin, wool, cotton, velvet, or cotton, depending upon the occasion. I made one pair out of ultra suede and one in silk. You can fit your iPhone in the side pocket and your leather gloves in the other pocket. I made my breeches out of this Tailor's Guide pattern. Since women are built differently from men with hips, make a cotton mock-up first. Breeches are meant to fit high-waisted, at least 2 inches above the natural waist. This is another pattern for breeches from Laughing Moon, which I subsequently discovered. I haven't yet made a pair from this pattern, but I prefer this pattern maker because it offers both period and modern instructions. Brummell replaced breeches with tight-fitting pantaloons meant to show off the contours of the legs. He paired them with tasseled Hessian boots. Pantaloons were made of semi-stretch fabric, which produced the look of a classical statue. They were known as inexpressibles, as they were quite revealing and left little to the imagination. Brummell and his tailor are also credited with inventing trousers, which were looser fitting. The waistcoat, spelled like waistcoat, was where gentlemen could display color, and personal style. An under waistcoat or a slip vest could also be worn for extra color accent. I used Cannock's Corner pattern 4202 for the period 1790 through 1815 for the waistcoats and made them out of silk. However, Cannock's offers only period tailoring instructions, which in a waistcoat is very impractical. So if you know how to sew, ignore the instructions and do what you know. However, if you are a beginner, I would recommend the Laughing Moon pattern. Laughing Moon makes superior patterns with detailed instructions and also offers both period and modern instructions. The tailcoat became the central piece of the male wardrobe. British tailors had become renowned for their skill in working with wool. Amazingly, the tape measure was a recent invention and only in general use by 1818. This meant that prior to taking quick and accurate dimensions of a customer using a tape measure, tailors had to rely on parchment paper held up to the body. To dress in this whole outfit without the aid of a valet, allow 15 minutes, which includes tying that pesky cravat. I recommend putting on your boots before you don the tailcoat, because after you tie the cravat and don the tailcoat with its high stiff collar, you'll understand why Darcy cannot help but look down his nose at everyone. Put on leather gloves to complete your outfit. Since the fit of a tailcoat is very close, it gets quite warm, as you are wearing underneath it a bulky shirt, a tight cravat wound twice about your neck, and a waistcoat. Don't even think of taking off your coat in public. I made the tailcoat out of wool from this Laughing Moon pattern, which is dated 1810 to 1830. This pattern includes an inside left breast pocket where you can slip in a slim pocket wallet of your ID and credit cards. The tails of the tailcoat include hidden pockets, but don't expect to be able to access these in any discreet way. Gentlemen's proper evening dress attire of full dress in the early 1800s would have been a double-breasted tailcoat of black or dark blue, a single-breasted white waistcoat with a high starched cravat, knee-length breeches of white, gray, or fawn color, with white silk stockings and black pumps, and white gloves for dancing. Breeches were required at court, at the Smartest Pleasure Gardens, and at Elmex Club. The Duke of Wellington was famously refused entry to Elmex for wearing trousers in 1814. For full dress, you'll need a chapeau bras or cocked hat, a two-cornered hat shaped like a half moon, which you hold under your arm rather than wear. This is a naval uniform of 1820 from a costume exhibit at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art called Reigning Men, Fashion in Menswear, 1715 through 2015. The naval uniform represented Britain's naval supremacy, established by Admiral Nelson's victory at Trafalgar in 1805. Jane Austen had two sailor brothers, Francis, who rose to become an admiral of the fleet, and Charles, who became a rear admiral. Both were active participants in the wars between Britain and France and in the suppression of the slave trade. Here is my copy of the naval uniform, which I made out of wool and cotton velveteen. I adapted the above tailcoat pattern. By the end of the 18th century, the Navy was the largest employer in Britain. The increased status of the Navy meant that by 1800, naval officers attained a newly desirable social standing. In Persuasion, Sir Walter Elliot snidely declares the Navy to be, quote, the means of bringing persons of obscure birth into an undue distinction and raising men to honors which their fathers and grandfathers never dreamt of, close quote. The reason I decided to make menswear for myself was that I wanted a new sewing challenge after completing gowns of increasing complexity. I remember the time when I liked a red coat myself very well, and indeed so do I still in my heart, said Mrs. Bennet. I created a militia outfit inspired by George Wickham's outfit from the 1995 Pride and Prejudice. I made it out of wool, and it is a variation of the above tailcoat pattern. The epaulets I made out of upholstery fringe from Joann's. In order to achieve the correct Regency-era proportions in the male suit, there is a proper order of construction. First, make the breeches. Check that the waistband falls 2 inches above your natural waist. Second, make the shirt. Third, make the cravat. Fourth, make the waistcoat. Make a cotton mock-up of the waistcoat. Try it on with the breeches and shirt. If the bottom front edge of the waistcoat does not reach the top edge of the fall of your breeches, you need to lengthen the waistcoat. If the bottom edge of the waistcoat extends more than 1 inch past the top of the fall of the breeches, you need to shorten the waistcoat. The bottom of the waistcoat should fall 1 to 2 inches below the natural waist. Last, make a cotton mock-up of the tailcoat. Try on the coat with your breeches, shirt, and waistcoat. 1 to 2 inches of the bottom of your waistcoat should be visible under the front of the coat. If less than 1 inch of the waistcoat is visible, then you need to shorten the front of the coat. If more than 2 inches of the waistcoat is visible, then you need to lengthen the front of the coat. Volume the third. We're in the home stretch. This is a very short volume. These are some indispensable sewing tools. A large Omni-Mat, a 24-inch transparent Omni-Grid, and a rotary cutter are necessary to produce bias strips for piping and other trim. Other indispensable items include a seam ripper, bodkins, clippers, Fiskar scissors to be used only on fabric, and large tracing paper to copy out your patterns before you cut. A complete list of patterns is available on the JASNA Southwest website at jasnasw.com. An abbreviated list of fabric sources and a list of indispensable sewing tools will also be available on the JASNA Southwest website. My pattern for 2 triangular cravats and instructions on how to fold them are also available on the website at jasnasw.com. Here is a bibliography of the sources I've used for this presentation. However, any factual errors are my own. Thank you to my husband for all of his photography, and to my sister, Karen Te Yamashita, who helped me with all technical aspects of this presentation. Thank you to Barbara Barr and Erica Kotite, who persuaded me to make this presentation, and to all the JASNA members over the years who've encouraged me. Lastly, I want to recognize Nancy Ramsey, a fellow JASNA member with whom I partnered to put on a fashion exhibit at the 2017 AGM in Huntington Beach. Nancy was a meticulous seamstress who sold her Regency dresses on Etsy, which she mostly hand sewed. She loved to return again and again to Jane Austen's England. Unfortunately, in 2019, she passed away from cancer. Nancy Ramsey had a very generous heart, and she continues to inspire me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. So we have a number of questions, and yes, we all miss Nancy very deeply. She was a real treasure and a member of our board, and just a wonderful human being. So thank you for carrying on her legacy in this way, Jane. It's been wonderful. And we're getting wonderful comments about this presentation, which was just spectacular. So a number of people have questions about cleaning and about, you mentioned that the laundry is done like monthly or quarterly with a washing woman. What about like without wearing, with everyone going commando, it seems like there would be more potential for accidents, so to speak. Do you have any additional comments about cleaning in the era?
No, I don't know. That's all I know. I've never read about that part.
No.
Yeah.
So I remember reading in Longbourn that about the work of cleaning, and so if anybody's interested in that, you might want to read Longbourn, because it does get into that a little bit, even though that it's fiction. It was pretty interesting. Another one was someone asked about, did ridicule usage lead to more theft as this became more common? Do you know?
Oh, that's possible. I haven't read that, but that is possible because it wasn't hidden away. Yeah. And you could leave it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. One question is, what do you do once you debut your outfits? Because you've made so many. Do you? How often do you rewear them? What happens to them after you've worn them after their
Uh,
debut?
if I like them, I'll rewear them, but I think about it and then I'll put them aside and wait a couple of years to wear them again. Or maybe I try to space it out.
You have so many. I don't think I've seen you in one repeated in a couple of years. So yeah. And for those of you who came in a little bit later, like after we talked a little bit about this before 11, that Jane thinks she's made about 25 pieces,
Yeah.
but not 100% sure. So yeah, there was a question, how many outfits do you have? Another question was, oh, do you take orders?
No, I don't. I just do this for myself. Yeah, no, I don't.
That was actually my question. Anyway. Oh, this is just a lovely comment. This is from Claire Belanti. Allow us to tell you how much we admire your creativity, Jane.
Oh, thank you.
And what else? Okay, let's see how many other questions we have. Who else has a question? Everybody, please feel free to raise your hand. How long did it take you to put this presentation together? It's like,
Oh, well, I wrote it first, and then my sister helped me put it onto a keynote, the slideshow. And actually, we were evacuated. I was with her during a fire in Santa Cruz. And so then we went to the Apple store, and I got my first computer, and that's how we started actually putting it together. But yeah, I must have, I worked on it, I think maybe a couple months. Yeah, on and off. Yeah.
and when did you first start making your designs?
I think I started it in about 2009. Yeah, I think so.
Okay, let's see, someone was asking how often, where can you get the lightweight muslin type fabrics?
Oh, just go to Joann's Fabric.
Okay, okay. Is there a story behind what you're wearing now?
Oh, this is another, this blue. I also got this in India. This is silk. And then I decided to dress it up by putting these things on, and I had this, I think I used as trim on the Lord Byron outfit. So I thought kind of looks kind of more dressy.
Yeah.
I have a lot of stash that I just start looking at and think, oh, this will work.
Do you buy fabrics, do you you'll see a fabric and then figure out what you're going to do with it later? What's your process for putting together an outfit?
Yeah, I think I'm like quilters, as you'll see fabric and you have to buy it and then later on make it. But yeah, I just like the fabric and I'll get it. Yes.
And do you have a favorite outfit that you've made?
I think I like the men's outfits. I like that one I put up there. That's the naval outfit. I think I like that. It's very comfortable to wear. I like to wear the men's outfits the best, I think.
And when did you start making men's? Did you do that right away as well, or did that come a little bit later?
No, that came later. That came later because I got kind of, I felt like went as far as I could with women's outfits. After I did that 1817 green dress, which was the hat, I felt that I needed a new challenge. And so I thought, oh, let's try menswear. And I knew that was going to be really heavily tailored, but I thought, I'd just try. And, I've got a lot of patience, so I did that.
I really love the Union Jack piece on your, the turban and the Ridicule. That was amazing.
Yeah, that's just going to be funny.
It's just, I love the little bit of creativity, like your sash for the AGM. That was wonderful. Someone else was asking, how big of a closet do you have, and how do you store your hats?
Oh yeah, there's all over the place. I took over my daughter's closet to store half of her closet to store all those dresses, and then the hats are I could put them one within another, and they're in boxes. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of storage.
I see that, see, Rebecca has her hand up. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, I wondered what the average cost per dress is and the average length of time it takes to make one.
Ah, well, this dress is pretty simple. I made this in about a week. Off and on, I was doing it. They're kind of yeah. I sometimes don't think about that. I think it's a kind of expensive hobby because silk is quite expensive per yard, and I generally buy 5 to 6 yards of it. I'll use it for the hat, and I might use it extra for a Spencer, in a Ridicule, but yeah. And silk might run $30 a yard. Yeah.
And how do you know, I'm sorry, go ahead. Someone else was asking, how do you know how much fabric to purchase?
It says it in the, on the pattern. I generally get minimum 5 yards, regardless of whatever the width is. So that's where my starting point is. Yeah.
Do you use a dress form for fitting? And if so, how did you acquire it?
I use a dress. It's not I got these from a store that was going out of business. And then I went to that dress form. And then it's not me, it's just a small body. After I've started using it, it's really a nice thing to have because you can just put it on there, and we're able to work on your dress. I had never done that before, and so it's a very convenient sewing tool. I got dress forms for that fashion exhibit, and I went to a mannequin store. That we just looked up, and I went right to the factory and bought the smallest ones I could find. Yeah.
And you mentioned that it took you about a week to make the gown that you're wearing now. How about for a coat and a men's pants? What's the average time?
That I haven't done a long time, but that takes a long time. Those are I would say maybe 3 weeks, 4, at least a month. Yeah, that takes a long time.
A couple of people asked about, the resources you mentioned early in your talk, and just want to reiterate for everyone that Jane's going to make all this available. It'll be on the JASNA website, our Southwest website, and we'll also include an email to all people who registered. So you'll have the links to find all the information. Someone else is asking, what's your favorite Jane Austen film adaptation when it comes to the costumes? And what do you think of the new Emma?
Oh, I love the new Emma for costumes. That was really interesting. She had those Elizabethan ruff collars, and that was really interesting. I love that yellow pelisse. She had beautiful clothes. So that would be it's always my latest one. The latest adaptation is my favorite one, and that was I would just watch that again for the costumes. They're beautiful.
They were spectacular. Someone's asking if you have any hints for keeping cotton from wrinkling.
No, there's no. Just have to iron. Yeah.
And is sewing on silk different than using cotton?
Actually, silk, the only issue is raveling. And so you just have to do French seams. So naturally it takes twice as long to sew because you're sewing each seam twice. But no, silk is very easy to work with, and it's extremely lightweight. So it's great to take to annual general meetings because you can pack a lot in your suitcase as opposed to cotton, which is quite bulky and will, yeah, wrinkle. So silk does not wrinkle. It just shakes out. So it's really the easiest thing to travel with.
Great. What do you know about the flaps in men's trousers instead of zippers?
The front, it's instead of a fly, it's a fall because it's kind of like, it looks like that copper tone baby fall in the front. And that actually underneath it, it's sewed with buttons, but actually it can't be seen. So I have put Velcro underneath because it's just easier to get in and out in the bathroom.
That's great. What about women's riding outfits? Do you have any?
Oh, my sister-in-law, Francie Willis, made a riding outfit because she took side saddle riding instruction, and she made a riding outfit. And I did exhibit that at the my fashion exhibit in 2017 at Huntington Beach. And that's a lovely riding habit.
Have you ever tried to make a dress using period techniques such as hand sewing?
Oh gosh, no. I know Nancy Ramsey did that, and I looked at her seams, and it is amazing. That that's beyond me. Don't have the patience for that.
Do you have a good source for gloves?
No, I don't. I just go on Amazon. Be sure you get cotton, not those it's hard to find cotton, but be sure that they're cotton because the other ones will be very shiny, the polyester ones, and also get very, very sweaty in dancing. So this may take a long time to look for it, or they might be vintage, but these are actually new. But I think I found these on Amazon.
Great. What dressmakers of the day were dressmakers of the day typically men or women?
I think women dressmakers, mantle makers were women. Yeah. I learned in that in the AGM about stay and corset makers that they were initially men, but then they became women.
And do you know if middle-class women would make their own pieces at home? Like they did their bonnets, but what about dresses? Do you know?
I think they might have, they might have been with the help of a lady, their maid. They might have been able to make a dress. I can't believe that they couldn't do that. If they were making men's shirts, that they could also do that. But for fancier fancier dress, I think they went to a mantua maker. But I would think that simple morning undress, morning clothes, cotton, they could have done that themselves.
So you mentioned your favorite adaptation in terms of costumes. Do you have a least favorite Austen adaptation for costumes?
Wow. Yeah, that would be the Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice. That was odd. I read that the director didn't like that whole Regency-era look, so he brought down he changed the look of the gowns. They were they didn't fall in the right time period.
Let's see. We had so many questions come so quickly that I might have missed some. So if I missed your question, let me know. Anybody want to raise their hand if I missed a question? Because I think we got through them all. Let's see. Anybody else? Okay. Well, this was wonderful. So many wonderful comments about this great job and wonderful presentation, all your gorgeous pieces. It was so fascinating, Jane. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
Anybody else have any last minute? Okay, we've seen lots of applause. It's so lovely to have all of you here, and we hope to see you December 12th for our next event. And thank you again, Jane. And again,
thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And we did have one last question about the recording. Yes, the recording will be available, technology, willing, and all the resources that Jane had mentioned will be sent in a link to you all. So thanks everybody for coming. Have a great rest of the day. So wonderful to see so many people from all over the world. Thank you for joining us. All right, and thanks again, Jane.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.